On March 7, 1944, at 8:30 hours, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa stood on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Taihō, watching the morning sun rise over Linga Road's anchorage off Sumatra. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, and the horizon was quiet. Taihō was brand new. She was the only completely new purpose-built fleet carrier Japan had completed since the war began. It had taken 32 months to build this ship. For Japan, this was fast. For Ozawa, this ship was the last card Japan had left in the carrier war. Ozawa had received intelligence 3 days earlier. The numbers were unbelievable. In the same months that Japan had built one single fleet carrier, the United States had built 17. Not escort carriers, not converted merchant ships, full-sized fleet carriers, 17. Ozawa could not understand how this was physically possible. He had spent his whole life around ships. He knew how long it took to build a ship. He knew the limits of yards. He knew how many steel plates a carrier needed. Nothing in his professional experience allowed the numbers he was now seeing to make sense. Japan entered the war with the most advanced carrier force in the world. 6 modern fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, the world's best-trained naval aviators, the world's most experienced carrier battle doctrine. They had practiced carrier strikes since the 1920s. They had developed coordinated multi-carrier operations. They had perfected long-range naval aviation. The American Navy had never tested their carriers in a major war. The Americans were still learning. It looked like Japan would run the Pacific. That was the belief in Tokyo. That was the belief across the country. The Japanese Navy had never lost a major naval battle. They believed spirit was more important than industry. They believed training and courage would overcome any industrial difference. But the industrial difference was not small. It was not 2 times. It was not 5 times. America had 10 times the industrial strength of Japan before the war even started. Yamamoto knew this. He had visited the United States. He had seen American factories. He had seen American steel mills. He had seen American shipyards. He told the Japanese government that war with America was suicide. He said Japan could win for 6 months. After that, America's production would crush them. The Japanese government did not listen. They believed morale was stronger than factories. They believed Japanese spirit was stronger than American machines. They believed one Japanese warrior was worth 10 Americans. That belief was false. When Shoho was sunk in May 1942, it did not seem like a crisis. Shoho was small. She was a converted ship, not a true fleet carrier. But 1 month later at Midway, 4 Japanese fleet carriers were sunk in one day. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. 4 carriers that had taken Japan more than 20 years to build. Japan had no way to replace them fast. When the staff in Tokyo ran the numbers, they realized something terrible. To replace those 4 carriers working at maximum capacity would take 6 years. And during those 6 years, Japan would not be able to build destroyers, cruisers, submarines, transports, or merchant ships. That was impossible. So the Navy made a compromise. They would continue building Taihō. They would convert merchant ships into light carriers. And they would design a new class of smaller carriers that were cheaper and faster to build. On paper, this looked smart. In reality, it did not matter. Japan no longer controlled the chemistry of the war. Industry controlled it. Taihō herself, the ship Ozawa was standing on, was considered fast by Japanese standards. 32 months from keel to commission was a record for Japan. But in America, ships were being built in 20 months, 16 months, even 14 months. And not one ship. Not 2 ships. Dozens of ships. The Americans changed the entire philosophy of shipbuilding. They treated ships like machines that could be built in pieces like cars are built in factories. They changed shipyards into giant assembly lines. Henry Kaiser, a man who was not even a traditional shipbuilder, changed shipbuilding forever. He broke ships into modules. He taught workers to weld one small part. Not the whole ship, just one part. But thousands of workers did this. At the same time, and suddenly a ship that took 6 months to build could be built in 40 days. Kaiser's yards built 50 escort carriers in only 14 months, 1 every 8 days. Japan thought these reports were lies, but they were not lies. They were facts. And those facts showed one thing. Japan could not win. The Americans kept building. They built large fleet carriers too. The Essex-class. They were bigger than Taihō. They carried more aircraft. They were finished faster. The United States used standard design. Every ship used the same blueprint. If something broke, they replaced it instantly. If something was wrong, they threw it away. Because they had more steel, they had more workers, they had more machines. In Japan, nothing could be thrown away. Every piece of steel was precious. Every worker had to fix mistakes. Time was lost on repairs. Time was lost on shortages. Time was lost because the system was not fast enough. America had more people, more factories, more electricity, more machine tools. They had more cranes, more welding equipment, more training centers, and they trained workers in weeks, not years. They did not care if someone had no experience. They taught them one single task, and that task repeated every shift every day until that worker became faster and faster. Within months, a young woman from Kansas could weld faster than a Japanese master shipbuilder with 10 years' experience. Not because she was more skilled, but because the American system was designed for speed. The Japanese system was designed for craftsmanship. In peace, craftsmanship builds beautiful ships. In war, speed wins. Taihō was a beautiful ship, but she was built in a system that was already defeated by numbers and steel. Ozawa knew the war was already lost. He could not say it, but he felt it. The deck below him was metal that took 32 months to shape. Across the ocean, America could build a bigger ship in half that time, and they could build 15 at once. When Taihō entered battle, she would not face one American carrier. She would face many. She would face Essex-class in groups. She would face carriers that were mass-produced like weapons from a giant factory. Taihō was the last hope of a navy that no longer controlled the war. America was not stronger because of bravery. America was stronger because of organization, because of factories, because of industrial logic. The Pacific War was not decided by aircraft. It was decided by welding torches and steel plate thickness. It was decided in factories far away from the ocean. Taihō sailed into war carrying more than aircraft. She carried the weight of a dying industrial strategy. Inside her hangar were Zero fighters and Judy dive bombers and Jill torpedo bombers, but those machines were symbols too. They represented Japan's belief that elite skill could defeat mass production. The pilots on Taihō believed they were the best in the world. They had been trained for years. Many had fought since 1941. Some had fought since China, but skill cannot outfly replacement rate. A dead pilot is gone forever. An American pilot who dies is replaced by 3 more trainees who will graduate in 6 months. Taihō's pilots were like handmade swords. America's pilots were like factory-made bullets. In a war of factories, the bullet wins. Japan knew by 1943 that their pilot loss rate was becoming dangerous. After Midway, the elite veterans were gone. After Guadalcanal, the training pipeline broke. Experienced instructors were sent into combat and were killed. Training time was shortened. New pilots were rushed into battle. They were brave, but they were no longer elite. America did the opposite. America removed experienced pilots from frontline squadrons and used them as instructors. So the skill of the entire pilot force rose together. One American ace trained 500 pilots. One Japanese ace died with his knowledge locked inside his memory. That is another version of the same industrial story. America mass-produced skill. Japan could only craft skill one individual at a time. Taihō's armored flight deck was seen as the solution to American bombs. But armor does not matter if enemy numbers are too large. Taihō had thick steel to protect her hangar. That was good. But thick steel made the ship heavier. Heavy ships require more time to build. Heavy ships require more complex structure. And when a system is slow, heavy is the enemy. America chose not to armor their flight decks at first because they wanted speed of construction. They could build more ships. They could repair ships faster. They could rotate damaged ships home and replace them with a fresh one. Japan could not. Taihō was one ship. America had many ships. That was the truth that mattered. In June 1944, Taihō entered the Battle of the Philippine Sea. This battle is often called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It was one of the clearest examples in history of industrial warfare crushing elite doctrine. Japan launched more than 300 aircraft. Many were shot down before they even reached American ships. American radar detected them far away. American combat air patrol fighters, equipped with radios and vector control, intercepted them long before they could attack. Japanese pilots were brave. They pressed attacks under impossible circumstances. But bravery does not stop radar. Courage does not erase loss of fuel. Tactical skill does not refill a hangar deck. Japan lost aircrew that day, but Japan could not replace them. America could and did. Taihō herself did not survive the battle. She was struck by a single American torpedo. One hit did not sink her, but leaking fuel vapor built up inside her sealed interior spaces. A ventilation error caused the fumes to spread. Hours later, a spark ignited the vapor. The explosion tore the ship open. Taihō sunk. She survived contact, but she could not survive internal failure. Her armored flight deck meant nothing. The ship sank not because of American weapon superiority, but because of systems that were stretched beyond their safe limit. A brand new ship, the most modern carrier Japan ever built, was destroyed by a simple chain of mechanical mistakes. Ozawa had to transfer his flag to another ship. While Taihō sank, American carriers were launching new airstrikes. If America lost one ship, they had another ready to replace it. If Japan lost one ship, there was nothing waiting behind her. This is the difference in industrial war. Losses are not measured in number of ships sunk. Losses are measured in how many ships you have left. If one side can replace losses faster than the other, that side will win. Japan's shipyards could not build carriers in parallel. They could not build 10 Taihōs at once. America could build 10 Essex-class ships at the same time. They built them like a series product. They built them like a mass manufacturing line. They used welding instead of riveting. They used prefabrication instead of hand assembly. They used repetition instead of craftsmanship. For Japan, shipbuilding was an art. For America, shipbuilding became a factory science, and factory science beat art. America built not just carriers, but everything around the carriers. They built oilers to refuel at sea. They built floating repair docks. They built new dry docks and forward bases. They built new harbors out of nothing, like at Ulithi Atoll. America created mobile logistics. Japan did not. Japan believed battles would be short and decisive. Japan expected to win early. They expected enemy morale to break. They expected quick victory. When that did not happen, they had no plan. America planned for a long war from the first day. America planned like engineers. Japan planned like gamblers. By mid-1944, Japan had 9 carriers. America had more than 100 carriers of all types. That number is not exaggerated. More than 100. Even if Japan had somehow scored a perfect tactical victory and destroyed 50 American carriers in one battle, America would still have had more carriers left than Japan ever had in the entire war. That is how large the industrial gap was. The war had already been decided in 1942. Midway did not decide it. Midway revealed it. The Japanese Navy tried one final time to respond. They commissioned 3 Unryu-class carriers in 1944, but these ships had almost no trained air groups. They were empty ships. A carrier without airplanes is not a weapon. It is only a hull. Japan had no fuel to train pilots. They had no fuel to run engines. They had no time to teach skills properly. They had no experienced instructors left alive. The factories that built aircraft were bombed. The factories that built engines were short of aluminum, steel, and electricity. The plan to rebuild the carrier force was already dead before the ships even launched. When the Americans landed in the Philippines, Japan could not contest air superiority. When the Americans attacked Okinawa, Japan could not stop them with carrier aviation. The carrier era for Japan was already over. The final Japanese carriers did not even attempt major carrier operations. They were mostly evacuated to home waters. They were targets during air raids. They never had a chance to fight as real carrier strike groups. Their existence was symbolic, not strategic. They existed on paper, not in battle. When the war ended, Japan had built only 5 fleet carriers after Pearl Harbor. America had built more than 20 Essex-class fleet carriers. America had built more than 100 escort carriers. And America had more carriers still under construction when Japan surrendered. This is the true simple answer to the question Ozawa asked himself while standing on Taihō's bridge. How did they do it? The answer is steel. The answer is welding. The answer is standardized parts. The answer is conveyor logic applied to the ocean. The answer is that America turned a war into a supply chain problem, and then crushed it with scale. The war in the Pacific was not primarily a duel of pilots. It was not primarily a battle of admirals. It was a math equation. Japan was fighting a country that could outproduce it 10-1. Japan entered a contest where the enemy had more tools, more machines, more workers, more electricity, more fuel, more training centers, more cranes, more welding torches, more steel, and more factories. No matter how strong the Zero fighter was in 1942, no matter how brilliant the tactical strike was at Pearl Harbor, no matter how experienced the pre-war Japanese naval aviators were, they could not defeat the American factory system. In a war of machines, factories are the front line. In a war of carriers, shipyards are the battlefield. In a war of production, welding torches are the weapons. The Japanese Navy never truly understood this until it was too late. Ozawa understood it. Yamamoto understood it, but their government believed willpower could bridge a steel gap. Steel does not care about spirit. Steel cares about mines. Steel cares about smelters. Steel cares about coal and electricity. Steel cares about rolling mills. America had these things. Japan did not. That is how the war was lost.